We're live right now. Just finishing up some setup stuff here. Let me know how the levels are, everybody. Just gonna make sure everything's working, and then we will get going here. Okay. Welcome to another casual Saturday live stream. I haven't done one of these in a while, but just because I've been so busy and I was away for last weekend, just felt like I've been away, or just either had other priorities other than the live stream over the past couple of weeks. So it's nice to get back to doing these, and good to see everybody in the chat again. Again, I try and do these on a weekly basis, but sometimes it doesn't work out. By the way, I'm not actually using my light right now because it's pretty hot, and so I don't want to overheat while I'm doing it. So it's gonna be a little bit of a darker stream and maybe a little bit more noise and grain, but that's okay. Oh, I see. 1 second, guys. I'll be back in 1 second. All right, I'm back, and I keep getting this warning on the YouTube stream health thing telling me to check video resolution. I don't think I have any dropped frames, but it says 1920 by 1080 is not optimal. Pretty sure it is optimal. Guys, let me know how the quality is. Is the quality good? It's always tough to tell when you're like the only one doing it. Okay. Seems like things are good and YouTube is just lying to me, so I'm just gonna go with what you guys tell me. Looks good in your iPad Pro. Come on, man. I expect like a nice, ultra wide 4K resolution monitor or something like that. 1440p at least. I guess new iPads do have high resolution displays. It was in 1440p, now it's at 1080. Yeah, so I just switched it down. The main reason for that is I don't want my camera to overheat or have any issues. And it's usually fine at 1440, but because it's so hot these days, I don't want to run that risk. Oh, probably because I started the stream at 1440 60. There we go. Oh, now it says no data. Anyways, unless somebody lets me know that there's something wrong, I'm just, I'm gonna keep going here. So yeah, for today's live stream, I figured we could just do a general Q&A. Feel free to dump any questions that you have in the chat, and I'll answer them, as best I can. And if you want to make sure that your question is heard or read or responded to, you can use the super chat function, but don't feel like you have to. I'll still try and get to as many as I can. Tyler has had problems with his camera overheating. I think he uses... I don't think he does anymore. I know he was on the A7 III before, and that may have had some issues. But now he's on the A7S III, I think. Again, I'm not totally sure why, because he does more photos, but I think at least for streaming, it should be... That one shouldn't have any issues with overheating, as far as I know. I use the A7C for the video that we do. I'm just doing this on my Fuji. X-T4, but which I actually find is pretty good for streaming because it doesn't have any power, or because you can power it while you're while it's live, and then while you're using it, and then also it doesn't typically have overheating issues, but again, because it's so hot right now, like just these days, it's something that I'm trying to make sure doesn't happen. But yeah, in the studio, I've moved to the Sony A7C for the benefits of full frame in a small space. I think if we had like a big space, then I wouldn't really need to go there. But the other nice thing is that when you have a camera, like a full frame camera, you can have the whole camera much closer to you, so you can actually see the monitor on it much more easily. Whereas with the APS-C cameras, you got to have them quite a bit further away, or a much wider lens, wider angle lens, and then that distorts things a little bit. So, but let's dive in and get to some questions here. Hey Andrew, what do you think about the Aslan Kern T9IE? I haven't heard it, but I think that's something that Chrono might be reviewing. I'm not sure, but I haven't heard that one. Is that like I feel like that's like their collaboration with another company, right? Is that an over-ear? I'm not sure. I feel like it's a Bayer Dynamic or something like that. Or no, IE maybe in-ear. Yeah, maybe something Bayer Dynamic. Wait, now he really dead? Is it not working? I can't tell. Everything... Oh, shit. Is it not working at all? If it's... This should be working, guys. Like, everything I'm seeing looks like it's working. I have no dropped frames. So, yeah. It could just be a YouTube issue because I didn't change anything on my end. But okay. Let's see, what's next? Do you have plans to review the Mangard T / Zens, XNs? Mangard T has been on my radar, only because Kryn did mention, I think a long time ago in one of his Moondrop something, I think it was Blessing 2 reviews, that it reminded him of Mangard T. That's the only real sense that of what they're doing that I have. So they are on my radar, but I don't know if I would prioritize it. The only thing is, like, there are so many IEMs, really good IEMs that are coming out of China, and the Chi-Fi stuff. I'm actually not sure where the Mangard T stuff's from, but stuff like Moondrop, stuff from Dunu, stuff from The Audio, the list goes on. There's a lot of really competitive stuff that it's difficult to be able to focus on just one in one video. I feel like I have to kind of like cover multiple IEMs because there are just so many. I think you could just spend all of your time on doing really good Chi-Fi IEMs, like covering really good Chi-Fi IEMs. You wouldn't really get to anything else. And that's the thing, like, I mean, if anything, I saw, there's a video a while ago that I think Steve Guttenberg did about, why he was saying how measurements don't matter and stuff like that. The fact that there's so much competitive stuff, that's coming out of the Chi-Fi brands, the fact that that stuff is so good is a testament to the importance of measurements. And it's for no other reason other than just the pragmatic benefits to everybody when suddenly customers index for measurements, right? I mean, even if you don't agree with a given target or don't like the thing that measurements say is good, the fact that at least when it comes to headphone tunings, I'm not saying for amps and things like that, but for headphone tunings, the fact that companies, manufacturers, are now in a bit of a sink or swim situation, a scenario with good measurements versus bad measurements, At the very least, it puts pressure on them to be more meticulous and careful and calculated with their tunings, rather than just putting a driver into an enclosure and then focusing more on marketing. It's as if it's as if the marketing side of things has started to really focus on and incorporate measurements, and I think that's only ever a good thing. When it comes to headphones, again, it gets much more difficult with DACs and amps and things like that, because that stuff is not predictive of sound quality the way that frequency response is. So, and I see the negative consequence of this happening as well, where a lot of folks, you'll even see it on the marketing brand pages for amps and DACs and things like that, how well they measure on somebody's given their audio precision thing that they did. And as much as that data is interesting, that data is not correlated with sound quality preferences the way that frequency response is, but people will still index for it. So you end up with stuff that might measure really well, but any benefit there is way beyond the threshold of human hearing anyways. So we end up in that weird, this has been on a bit of a tangent, but deviated from your question a little bit, but it ends up being a little bit like back with gaming mice and stuff like that, where manufacturers would just put on the box this thing can do 64,000 dpi, and it's like that none of that matters. Or there's very few people who in the competitive stuff would actually care about that, because they're all at 800 dpi anyways. It depends on what it is you're doing, of course, but those types of marketing tactics, I feel like they're probably being done for the wrong reasons. However, there are positive results in many cases, for example the Chi-Fi brands. All right, that's a long-winded answer to that question. Have you heard anything about the Tangent in prison? Nope. In your opinion, are Felix Audio Euphoria and Mytech Liberty DAC a good pairing for the LCD4? That wouldn't have been my choice. But and I can't tell you that because I haven't tried the LCD4 off of the Euphoria. Certainly I would have chosen something for the Euphoria that's a dynamic driver headphone, not that would be the pairing that I would consider more. With an LCD4, I would look for something that's just a high current solid state amplifier. But if you like the way that sounds, then that's awesome. I haven't heard that combo. Is HE400SC or HD560 better for instrument separation? I see. Which one of those is better? I think that the HD560 is just a better headphone overall because it has a more even tonal balance. With the 400SC, you have some unevenness there in the mids, and then the bass rolls off a little bit. But at the same time, the 400SC is smoother in the treble, which is kind of important for metal. Also, you do have better instrument separation, yeah. So, what I almost think I would say go with an HE400SC and then just EQ up the bass. Put a bass shelf there around 150 hertz, and that'll be good for metal. Noticed you recently purged the Ananda and LCD GX from the headphone recommendations and video descriptions. Why? Did I? I didn't intentionally do that. The only time that I take something off of that in the video descriptions is there's a limit on how many characters you can actually put in the description for obvious reasons. And I think when I add something else in, it makes it so that there's a limit there, and I need to decide which ones do I recommend more. So, as much as I like the GX and the Ananda, in that price range, you can now buy the Focal Clear for $990. That's just better there than both of them, in my opinion. You can also buy an Alex for $700. I think the Alex versus the Ananda is a very good comparison. The Ananda should still be on there, though, because I do recommend that headphone. I would recommend the Ananda over the LCD GX as well, even though the GX is great. I think I like the Ananda better, personally. Um, any thoughts on the name Atom HE? Um, very few. uh, you're talking about the name Unity Atom Headphone Edition. Yeah, yeah. I it sounds great actually. Very dynamic is the way I would describe that. Very engaging and dynamic. But beyond that, I mean, I think I would never use the streamer functions, right? Like, I'm not somebody who uses that. So a lot of its features and the reasons to get it and reasons to pay that kind of money are for features that I would personally never use. So I think if you see yourself using those functions, even the radio function was pretty cool on it. If you see yourself using it for that, then I think it's probably worth it. But if you don't see yourself using those features, I think you can get, as good sound quality for less. But yeah, it's a gorgeous unit too. The thing looks crazy. Also, I wasn't too sold on the I/O in the back. Like the it used a different type of USB connection, and then also I had some trouble with just using it with RCA with a separate DAC. So I had a pre-production model just to evaluate and give check out, so I didn't spend that much time with it, but those are the things that I noticed, and they may have updated that in the release. So yeah, so for example, when I was running it single-ended with RCA, I did notice some of the ground loop stuff with USB from the DAC. Now, of course, when you use optical, that goes away. So it's not really an issue, but it's enough of an issue where I go, well, there's one potential use case that I wouldn't use it for, but I also don't think it's intended to be used for that. So if the Aria is the planar version of the HD800S, what's the planar version of the clear magnesium? I don't think there is one. The reason why the Aria is the planar version of an HD800S. Okay, wait. Let me think about this. LCD-X is probably the closest to the clear magnesium. That's the thing. I'm not saying that the Aria sounds like the HD800S. Just that it's the closest to that kind of sound. Slightly brighter than neutral in the treble. Mainly is awesome for soundstage. I think that there's a pretty big difference though in terms of the way that it presents the soundstage. I think the Aria is more about forward depth. The HD800S is more about lateral distance. But that's why I kind of put those two together. Is they both are very good at similar things. And with the Clear MG, the reason why I would put the LCD-X as the planar version of that, it's not the Clear magnesium is. The things that the LCD-X does well aren't necessarily I can't do that same comparison, but it's the closest thing I can think of because the LCD-X is also a little bit boosted there in the upper treble, the air kind of quality, as is the Clear magnesium. That's why I think that I would put those two kind of in a similar camp. Is the Alex the ultimate in terms of macro dynamics, or if money is no object, are there headphones that do it better? Yeah, the Utopia and the HE6. Good luck finding one of those. When is Canada ever going to bring back the cup? Probably not going to happen. It wouldn't surprise me. I don't imagine that'll happen because, well, I think there's a couple reasons, but I think a lot of it has to do with the dollar value and then also tax reasons. So if you think about incentives for players, but even if in the most part they don't care about that, I think that if you kind of zoom out and look at take a wide look at it, it probably has an effect. Best headphone for bass you've ever heard? Best headphone for bass quality? Bass quality. LC4. Because I would say HE6, but then I still think the LCD4 is like another level of detail above that. So LCD4 or Focal Utopia would be those two. The Utopia, I mean, this is just like, I don't know. I actually think that the macro contrast on the Utopia is more significant in the bass, even though like the sub bass isn't as intense, whereas the LCD4 extends like, well, the LCD4 is also kind of a little lower on the bass as well. But if you EQ that up, then probably LCD4, yeah. How can I get a loaner of the Celesti? I don't know. Talk to you know who to talk to. That's from Metal 571. I don't know. There's lots of loaner tours and stuff like that for folks who want to get in on that. But I don't know if there's one on the Celesti yet. But this is my own personal unit. Let's see. IE 900 on your way, Andrew? No, but Chrono has one. He did a review. I think he's going to do actually a little roundup of like IEMs, because he's been focusing a little bit more on portable stuff lately, just because he's in a different location now. So that's definitely one that he's covered, and we'll cover again. I'd like to hear it because I was thinking about this. The reason why Corinne is wrong about the Celesti. We're gonna get a little spicy because for anybody who's unaware, I'd consider Corinne to be a friend of mine, and I respect his takes. And generally, I agree with what he says, and I really like what he's doing. But I disagree with his take on the Celesti. The reason being is for over-ear closed-back headphones, over-ear closed-back dynamic driver headphones specifically, I fundamentally think that you can do more things with over-ear headphones than you can with IEMs. If we're talking like all IEMs, I understand his point, and I to a certain extent I kind of agree with that, the sentiment that you could potentially end up with a better sounding IEM to achieve the closed-back goals. But if we're talking strictly dynamic driver headphones, I haven't heard one yet that gets even remotely close to this. I think the closest one might be the IE900. That's why I'm interested in hearing it. But that's also, I think, more expensive. So that's also why I think there's absolutely a place for dynamic driver closed-back headphones, like over-ear closed-back headphones. Because I really don't think that you can achieve that with IEMs due to the physical constraints. And we'll see. We'll see with the IE900. Okay. Mest is best. I want to check out the new, like the Mark II. I haven't heard that yet. Be very interested in that. But they are like the original Unique Melody Mest that I heard was pretty awesome for detail. Would you consider the Utopia / LCD4 / Sesvara a good trio for ultimate endgame if money is no object? Or is there redundancy in these? I need to hear a new LCD4 with the new updated pads. I got to talk to the folks at Odyssey, see if they can send one over, because I'm really curious about that. But I think, yes, I think those are the three that, I mean, the one thing you'd be missing there, I think, is maybe like a SR007 2.9, something like that. Or, I mean, if there's that Shangri-La Junior if you really want to go nuts. But yeah, for like most like attainable headphones, the Utopia, LCD4, and Sesvara, those are the three that I would personally gravitate to. I mean, LCD4 I also have a hard time with because it's so heavy that I don't know if I'd be able to like wear that for long sessions. But yeah, I do think that's legit. And with those three, you actually get like something that, like, each one of them does things that the other one can't. Like for overall tonal balance, what's the best one? Probably the Sesvara or the Utopia. For detail, that's going to be Susvara and the LCD4. For dynamics, that's going to be the Utopia and the LCD4. Right, you get what I mean? Like, there's always going to be like the things that the other ones can't do, or can't do as well, right? So you're going to have the best of every different quality, potentially. Trying to think what else. Soundstage would be the Susvara, and like I think LCD4 is also a little more spacious than the Utopia. Let's keep going here. Your D8000 Pro has a narrow soundstage and they don't seem $4,000 even though everyone says they're amazing. I run them with FIO M15 DAP. I'm sorry, I haven't tried that DAP, so I can't tell you if that's the reason. But generally with high-end planars, like power hungry planars, even though the D8000 Pro is not that power hungry, you want to run them with something that's high current. And also, I have an EQ profile for the D8000 Pro that's in my review of it, so check that out. Oops, sorry. Ever tried the clear MGs in the Felix Echo 2? Nope, I did not. I wasn't a huge fan of the Felix Echo 2, but again, the unit that I had might not have been representative because it had quite a bit of noise floor. But I think, again, that may have been like that may have been like a open box unit, and because there were some issues with it or something like that. So I don't feel confident saying one thing or the other on it. Would you prefer Euclid or Ara in terms of technicality and detail? I wouldn't really get either of them personally. The tonal balance for both of those doesn't really jive with me. But I think probably Ara, because the Ara does less. The Ara is less offensive overall. Like the Euclid is the best of those planar IEMs as far as tuning goes, but it's still got issues. Like it's still too uneven in the upper mids and in the treble. But yeah, that's a tough choice, and I personally wouldn't get either of them. Aria on the Mojo, will it work? I don't think I've tried that combo, but probably. Did I talk about the Oracle? I did a video on the Oracle. I think the Oracle is excellent. Planars in general have better separation in relatively same price, from my experience. There may be outliers that I have not heard. Yeah, that's right. Generally, planars are going to have better separation. Dynamic driver headphones are going to have better macro contrast, but not in all cases. There are absolute exceptions to that. I also think dynamic driver headphones have a more even distribution of images, like it's kind of all around, whereas planars are often kind of like you have a very immediate crossover point from like left to right. But again, not in all cases. There are exceptions like the Aria. What else is it different? I think at the high end for detail, the planars can do better, but also, yeah, I mean, it's getting planars with really good macro contrast is rare. For the most part, that's something that if you care about that quality, I would look more towards dynamic driver headphones, because you're more likely going to get it from those. Whereas with planars, there's how some people talk about like that planar compression thing. That's definitely real. It's definitely an issue with some, especially with a lot of the modern ones. It didn't used to be like that, because we had like the HE6 and HE500, which didn't have that issue whatsoever. The Audeze LCDs, like the older ones, and then of course the double-sided ones, and the higher end ones, they're typically fine for that. Like the LCD4 is pretty good for that. But some of the newer ones, they also kind of suffer from that planar compression issue. Like the LCD1 had nothing for dynamics whatsoever. So yeah, it's I think even starting next week, we're gonna have like a series of videos on the channel about how planar magnetic headphones work, and we're gonna deep dive on, because like we typically just focus on like very obvious visual parameters like whether or not the magnet structure has, whether or not there's double-sided or single-sided magnetic arrays going on. But there are so many additional parameters there that it's worth kind of like explaining that a little bit, I think. And so I'm going to start with kind of like a basic overview video of the difference between planar magnetic headphones and dynamic driver headphones, sort of demarcating them from the traditional moving coil headphones, and then go into some of the unique aspects of how planar magnetic headphones work for starters, and then so like the different parameters that there could be, like for example, everything from magnet strength to whether or not there are two arrays versus one array, to diaphragm thickness and stiffness and mass and diaphragm size and diaphragm material, and also the function of the pads, whether there's a deliberate leak in the pads, which there is on something like the D8000 Pro, but not on most others, where the resonance frequency is. So there are so many different parameters there that are worth talking about. And so we're going to try and do that with a number of examples, which should be kind of fun. Where was I? Way back up there. I'm going to have to miss a few here, guys. Stuff that I haven't heard. I do need to do another DT1990 Pro review, because I want to do one for 2021 to see kind of how it stacks up in that price range. I think it's really difficult to look at that like $500 price range right now, because a little bit more gets you an Alex or an Ananda, and a little bit less gets you a Sundara, and I think the Sundara is better than the 1990 Pro. So I think I'd previously been a little bit more charitable to the DT1990 because of potential studio applications, but these days I've kind of changed my mind on that a little bit. I don't think that it's actually useful for studio applications, although we actually just got a new writer on the team for the writing for the website, and he's a music producer / engineer. He might be in the chat, but I'd be curious to get his take on how, for anybody who's like using headphones for that type of stuff like music production, I'd be very curious what the results end up being on the DT1990 versus something else that's more neutral, like something like a K371 that doesn't have that harmonic imbalance from the treble. I see someone there with the super chat. Sean, thank you. You're my go-to for objective headphone discussion. Thanks for everything. What pads do you recommend for Verite Open? I'm comfortable with EQ. So just to be clear here, I'm still a subjectivist, not because I don't think that everything is potentially measurable, because I do. I think if you can hear it, you can potentially measure it, but rather just because what I'm doing is reporting my subjective experience. So I guess in short, it's I'm not confident that I can draw a straight line between the data and my experience yet, but I think that it is potentially captured. Everything is potentially captured by the data. So it's just a matter of doing better and more analysis of it. But to your question there about pads for the Verite Open, one of the things that I wasn't properly evaluating with the Verite Open when I was doing my evaluation was the significance of the pad compression, and it massively changes the frequency response. And so if you have a stronger clamp on the headband, you're going to get a totally different result in the FR. Like even if you look at Crin's graphs, they don't look that great, but a lot of that I suspect, because I've done a number of tests as well with this. I've done so many tests with the Verite Open, but what I found was that when you change the pad compression due to the clamp force, you get a totally different result. And so what you EQ, it should be based a little bit on that as well. Like you can't just like look at the FR and go, okay, here's where I need to EQ, because you're going to get different results there, for every person. So I have been using the BE2 Suedes. So that's the one that I've been using with my EQ profile, and I've also been using a relatively, like, not a very strong clamp on that, and I've got it to generally be kind of how I like it. But at the same time, I do know somebody was telling Tyler about, I think it was the I think it was the Auteur pads. I could be wrong about that. I need to ask Zach about that again, because I do want to get those other pads in. So there might be some other additional pads for the Verite that make it sound more like an Auteur, or even more like the Verite closed. Yeah, there's something like that. Like the Auteur pads made it sound more like a Verite closed. So I do want to check that out as well. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't really give you a definitive answer there, but I don't think that the book has been totally written yet on which pads are the best. I think, they would probably suggest that pick the pads that jive more with your preferences, but again, we need to see, I think, more results for those pads. And I need to get more of those in. But thank you for the question there. I just want to back up here because there was some more stuff here. Which is the best dollar invested? Blessing to Dusk, Dunu EST, or 64 U12T? Those are all very different. Blessing to Dusk or 64 Audio U12T. So this is the thing, right? I wouldn't put the Dunu EST in that category for competitiveness. Like the competitive IEMs are for value and price to performance are Blessing to Dusk and Blessing to, both of them, depending on the kind of presentation that you like. There's some of the edemotic stuff if you can handle like the ear violations that it does, because the fit is a bit odd. And then the Dunu SA6, I think there's a really good argument that says that the Dunu SA6 for its tonal balance is one of the best IEMs under even $1,000, because it's very similar to the tonal balance of the U12T. It's kind of like a baby U12T, just without the detail there. So if you're choosing between the EST112 and the SA6, I think the SA6 is very clearly and very obviously the better choice. But that's, because I really like that tuning. Now, the other IEMs that are worth consideration there in that price bracket are the Kiwi Ears Orchestra, which is right here, and it's so unbelievably good, this thing. Maybe not for like rock and metal, but like for most other genres, it's such a smart tuning. A little bit like it's generally relaxed, but like a little bit clangy there for rock and metal. But yeah, apart from that, it's so nice. Really good detail on it too. And then the Theaudio Oracle, the Moondrop Variations, which I should be getting in soon. I thought I was getting one before, but it was actually the Theaudio Legacy 2, which is not that special. But then, yeah, you can go up to the Theaudio Monarch and Clairvoyance. Those are also really good value. And then above that, the sort of value question, I think, stops being relevant because diminishing returns kick in pretty hard. But I do think the U12T is like still, if someone was like, have any IEM you want, I would probably still pick the U12T. I just like that tuning so much. So in some ways, if you want to do what Precog did and just skip everything, go right to the one that is probably the most highly regarded, you could just go straight for the U12T. Yeah. It's the most fun sounding closeback under $700. Not the most detailed, but the most fun sounding. K371. I don't know. It's tough. There's not a lot of stuff under $700 that's like you have like the stuff under $200 and then kind of not that much, and then $700 or $9, like these, like, you could maybe get a Legia and then swap the pads out or get use my EQ profile for it. You could do something like that, but because that will give you a detailed and punchy kind of sound. Yeah, but you said most fun, not necessarily most detailed, so kind of think K371. I don't know, maybe like those Fostex ones are a good option, like the Fostex TH610 and stuff like that. You can get those for under that. And they I see somebody else saying Fostex TH610. The tuning on those is a bit weird, like I don't know, and the details like not as good either, but they do have a more elevated bass response, so they're more in the fun category, I think, whereas these are a little bit more like referencey. I say referencey because like they're not strictly reference, but they're pretty close. They're a little closer to reference. I think these are a little more like mid forward and upper mid forward than like would be strictly reference. Compare the Celestia to the Elegia. It's a very clear and obvious win for the Celestia. But of course, I EQ'd the Elegia to be kind of what the Celestia is anyways. So, let's see. Verite closed versus LCD4 versus HE1000 V2. I haven't heard the HE1000 V2 for any stretch of time. Verite closed. I also haven't heard for any stretch of time, and the LCD4. It all depends on what the new the new one is with the new pads. But I mean, those are all kind of Endgame-ish headphones. I think the only one outstanding there's the HE1000 V2. It's not on the level of the other. Like I mean, Verite closed is a dynamic driver headphone, so it's not really going to compete with an LCD4 for detail, but it can compete for other aspects. And I think the tonal balance is probably better, quite a bit better. But again, it depends on what the new LCD4 is. All right, we got a lot of super chats coming in, so I gotta jump to these. Jerry, thank you. What do you think of the 4 new Moondrop announcements? The 4 new Moondrop announcements? I only know about the variations, and then they have an over ear, so I don't know what the other ones are. But the variations looks like. I mean, again, I haven't heard it, so I can't comment on this, but it looks like the $500 roughly IM to beat. I think it's going to come down to the variations versus the Oracle versus the SA6 versus the Kiwi Ears Orchestra. I think those 4 are going to be really the ones that everybody should be comparing, because unless there's something I'm just not even including at all because I haven't heard of it. But I imagine those would be the ones to go for, yeah. Grady, thank you. Holocene displaced the Andro and how's the low end? I'm going to say probably it doesn't. I haven't heard the Holocene, but I'm going to say probably not. You're dealing with a 3 balanced armature IEM, I think. Seems unless reference is what you're after. The lack of low end leaves the Audio Kings of the bracket. Oh, Kings of the bracket. Leaves the audio the Kings of the bracket. I see what you're saying. I do think that the Monarch is what, $720, $730, something like that. I still think that's probably, if you want like crazy thunderous intense bass but done well, the Monarch is the best IEM for that under $1,000 easily. But I don't know if I would say that The Audio are the kings of the bracket. Yeah. I mean, I'd say The Audio and Moondrop are the 2 that are kind of vying for that crown. But again, depends on what kind of presentation you want. Because if you don't want that crazy thunderous bass in the Monarch, the Clairvoyance, that's sort of what I would consider a tonal reference point, at least the one I evaluated, because there was some unit variation there. And the Moondrop variation, speaking of which, does seem to strike also a really good balance. It's maybe a little bit more upper mid forwards, has a bit more ear gain, because that tends to be what Moondrop does, right? They'll end up having something that, like, for most genres is fantastic, but then for some genres is a little bit shouty. Like the S8 was kind of like that. I couldn't really handle that. But so I think you have 2 of those, and then of course, I mean, it also depends on what, like, if Dunu does more stuff like the SA6, that's also going to be extremely competitive. So, like, I really think there's a strong argument to be made for the SA6 being one of the best IEMs or the go-to pick under $1,000, even though I still personally would probably say there's other stuff that, for certain genres is going to do better. Like, I think the Kiwi Ears Orchestra is actually more detailed. But again, for tonal balance and comfort and fit, and that's the other thing with the Monarch and Clairvoyance, is that they're huge. They're enormous. I have the Monarch right here, actually, I think. Or maybe, yeah. I actually don't have a reference. I don't have a Clairvoyance right now because I sent it down to Precog and then it broke in shipping. So I gotta ask, see if I can get another one in. But yeah, look at how, is this gonna, wait, it's gonna focus on my face. There we go. This thing is enormous. So that's, if you can't handle a big IEM, then that's another reason for the new SA6, or again, the Keybeers Orchestra, which is a little smaller, or the Oracle, which is also a little smaller. The Oracle is actually really comfortable. Will, thank you. What IEM would you prefer under $1,500 based on your liking? I would spend a little more and get the U12T, because when you're at $1,500, there's not much there that I personally would get. If the U12T is in reach, I would just wait and just save up and get the U12T. But there are IEMs that I like there. Like I do like the there's that the 64 Audio Neo, which again, if you want thunderous bass, that's kind of like the the next step up there. But I would probably run it with like the MX module, because to me the M10 and M20s are just nuts. Or M15, M15 and M20 it's just nuts in the bass. But a lot of people like that. If you're a bass head, then the Neo is definitely one to take seriously. But yeah, I would still just save up a little bit. What do you think about stacks? I need to hear one in my home environment, because you can't make a judgment based on a show evaluation. But saying that, the SR007 2.9 was pretty good. JTB, thanks. Rank these headphones. I'm considering selling one, maybe. LCD XC, it depends which one it is. If it's the 2021 version, then that's a little different from the older one. But LCD XC, HD100S, Clear, OG, Ananda, and HD600. Okay. Those are all good headphones. It's kind of headphone overkill and gets expensive. Okay. Out of all of those, man. Okay. Out of all of those, the one that... that's tough. I actually probably wouldn't sell any of those, because you have... Okay, let's start with HD100S. Okay, I'll rank them for you. Number one, for based on what I like, number one would probably be Clear OG. Number two would be LCD XC, because I like the benefits of the closeback there, and closeback planars, they're hard to come by, and that's probably the most technically impressive one. Number three would be the HD100. No, number three, would be HD100S, only because for soundstage reasons. Like, it's, if you want to get the best at soundstage, it's the HD100S, at least for width. And then after that, I'd put the Ananda, because it has probably the best frequency response out of all of them. In fact, I would confidently say that it has the best frequency response out of all of them. And then in last place, I'd put the HD600. However, there is absolutely a reason to keep the HD600, because the HD600 is often that tonal reference point that gets used for everything. And so because of that, it makes so much sense to keep that headphone. And then also, when you run it off of like crazy tube amps or whatever else, like it does change its character quite a bit. So I think it's worth keeping that headphone around. I don't think you should get rid of the 600. Man. Yeah, I'd say the answer to which one you can get rid of would depend on whether or not you use that LCD XC. Because if you don't use the LCD XC, either due to the weight or... No, wait, you have a newer one, don't you? I think you have a newer one. I can't remember. Yeah, HD600 on tubes, like HD600 even on higher end amplifiers in general, like that thing does scale. And there's a reason to keep it as a tonal reference point. Like, no, you're not going to get the same sub-bass extension as you will with some of these other ones. But at the same time, you get the nice natural timbre, you get pretty darn good detail for the price. I don't think it's on the level of the Clear, but again, it's got a smoother treble response. So I don't know. I would not get rid of any of those, as crazy as that sounds. Maybe, okay, the one that I personally probably would sell for the sake of buying something else is the HD100S. Even though that's the one that I think is either HD100S or Ananda. Only because, ask yourself this, do you find yourself using the Ananda more than the Clear? Like, if you're listening to music, you go, and you're listening to the Clear, do you go, oh man, I'm just going to switch to the Ananda right now? Because I think there's a bit of Like, they're totally different headphones, right? Like, the clear is more about punch and dynamics and slam. So in some ways, I actually think the two most redundant ones there are the Ananda and the LCD XC. So I'll pick between those two. Don't sell any of them. That's that's my answer. I feel like did I miss something? Yeah. I almost wish that I could get an original LCD-X and original LCD-XC in, and then compare them against the other two ones, because I'm curious like if all things are equal and everything's EQ to the same target, which is actually kind of tricky to do with the older LCD-X and XCs. If everything's EQ to the same target, is there any difference in terms of the subjective aspects, like the technical performance, given that they removed two of the magnets, or two of the phasers and two of the magnets, and then just respaced it out? I'd be very curious about that, because it's not something that's immediately like recognizable just from listening to one, and then like a month later listening to the new version of it. You got to have that stuff side by side. Battle 571 says he wasn't harsh enough on the DT 1990. Yeah, it's still a very popular headphone on Reddit. Like, a lot of people still like that stuff, that over sharpened thing. Rob, thank you. Is Dunu about to release a new IEM? I don't know. I have not talked to them about that. I mean, they're always, this is the thing, all those companies are always iterating and they're always releasing new stuff, so I would expect that they probably do at some point, but I haven't heard anything in particular. Or at least I don't know when they're planning anything. It's crazy to think people still believe in burn-in current year. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Oh, break-in is not a real thing. All right, so Jake is in the chat. What's up, Jake? I was talking about you earlier. Yeah, so burn-in is only, so talking with Oratory, we did a stream on this. And if you guys are curious about this, it's worth going back to some of those older streams, the one that we did with Oratory, where we asked him about this, because that's literally his job, is to make transducers. And I asked him about this question about burn-in, and he said theoretically it is possible that this stuff would change at over an initial bit of time, like not like the 100 hours that people talk about, not goalpost shifting levels, but like the first like 30 minutes or something, or even less than that probably. I don't remember exactly what it was he said, but I also think that he said something that like it was unlikely that you would ever need to do that, or unlikely that you would ever experience that. But my take on it is that it is, when people are reporting burn-in as not just a psychoacoustic or brain burn-in kind of thing, like an actual physical property, I think more often than not what they're reporting is the effects of pad compression and pad wear. Because, like, I don't want to say people are just like mistaken about their experiences, even though that's entirely possible. And pad compression and pad wear is absolutely a real thing, and I think you're more likely to experience that than any changes physically to the drivers or anything like that. Like when the pads, when you get them out of the box and then you put them on your head, they're maybe a little bit stiffer, and then after like even just like 15-20 minutes, it can kind of like conform a little bit, and then suddenly the sound is a little different. I think that's probably what's going on in most cases. So it's a different type of burn-in, I guess, pad burn-in. And then there's also like pad wear, especially on those Sennheisers, like with the 650s and stuff like that. Like there's pad, over time those do wear, and it changes the sound significantly in the treble. Nicholas, thank you. Hey, what are the best headphones for movies and immersive popcorn gaming? Hmm. I don't know, wouldn't you want something that has like the 3D like 5.1 BS? I I like for gaming, I wouldn't use one of those personally, like for competitive gaming, but for the what you described as popcorn gaming, maybe. Yeah, I could see myself using that. But I'm not the kind of guy for that. Like I don't get into that stuff all that much. But I will say for movies, it's pretty annoying that like a lot of I know on Netflix, like with a Netflix app, you can actually like select the audio, like whether it's two channel audio or 5.1. And it makes a pretty massive difference when you switch between the two. But there's other streaming platforms that don't give you the option. They just assume that you're using something that's 5.1, and then you have to use EQ to downmix or something. Like it's just really annoying. So for that reason, I would almost say, you know, make a decision based on the content. Like another thing that's worth thinking about is like if that's all you care about. I have a hard time recommending the AirPods Max for anything, but the one thing that it did well at was that sort of spatial audio with the Dolby Atmos, or sorry, the yeah, whatever content it was that worked with that 3D head tracking stuff, which wasn't all content, but a lot of the newer stuff that was coming out on Apple TV did have that, so it's worth considering if you are an Apple user. I can't believe I'm actually recommending that headphone though, because I really don't recommend it for anything else. Yes, LCD XT is a planar. Yeah. Burn-in is real, just like a car has to warm up to work efficiently. So does other electronics. Okay, but a headphone's not a car. Like, I don't. Again, it's worth going back and watching that live stream from Oratory, or that Oratory did, where he talked about that, because I think his take is probably, you know, that's literally insight from a transducer manufacturer. Also, another thing with that is like when manufacturers are going through it's something I mentioned a long time ago, but when manufacturers are going through the channel matching process, they are effectively doing that. Like they're making sure that the drivers are matched, and in so doing, you would probably have some effect on that. So maybe it's the case that certain really boutique headphones would benefit from a little bit more burn-in, or some. You know, there might be something to that question about the independent surrounds and the spider and all that stuff. Yeah, maybe there's something to that, but I also think that's not the majority of cases. I EQ the DT1990 and it's fine, I guess. Yeah, I imagine. I also just don't think it was that, like, the detail wasn't anything special either. Um, the Moondrop headphone, it looked interesting. I yeah, I need to get it in, and yeah, I saw some of the measurements there and it did look interesting. Yeah, pre-phaser LCD 2.1 and original LCD 1 of the old chassis. Oh, the original LCD one. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that'd be interesting. How does the LCD 2 compare to the LCD X, technicalities wise? Depends if you're talking LCD 2F versus LCD 2 Classic, because LCD 2F is a lot closer to the LCD X. The LCD 2 Classic is not that close. Max is selling as a marble version of HD600 for $220 on Headphone right now. Interesting. Letting go of such a pure classic. Maybe he's graduated to a 580. Oh yeah, he has a 580 sub-axle curl. Headphone drivers aren't designed to burn in. They don't gradually soften up any significant degree over time. They work to spec until they fail suddenly. Earpads do get worn though. Yeah, I'd be more inclined to say that again, this is what I'm saying. Even if there is some change in the, like, with that whole question about the, external, like the hybrid style surround transducers, like the dynamic driver ones. Even if there was some change there, I would imagine that you would get more of an impact from the pads, like conforming to the side of your head, than you would spending 150 hours. Like I can't comment on that again because I'm not, oratory. But that's why, if you guys want to get the answer from somebody who actually makes that stuff, he did talk about it. Let's see. Any headphone you would consider significantly better than an EQ'd LCD4? Yeah. It depends what qualities you're looking for, though. Like, I think Headphone Vara has a better soundstage. I think the Focal Utopia... Well, okay. The Focal Utopia, I don't think is as detailed as an LCD4, but I think there's an argument that it has better macro contrast. Although the LCD4 is pretty good there. I need to have side-by-side and EQ do the same thing. Also, the LCD4 is so ridiculously heavy, so it depends. But there is a totally good argument that says that the LCD4, an EQ'd LCD4 is like Endgame. Done, I need to get a new one of those in. Yeah, if you consider pad burn-in to be part of the headphone burn-in, then yeah, they do. They do benefit from it. But they also are, potentially worse over a long period of time with the pads deteriorate. All headphones are cars. Yeah. Power your headphones with diesel V12. Timbre, that's another thing. If you're looking for timbre, then maybe the LCD4, is not the thing for you. But personally, I still probably gravitate to a Susvara or Utopia for comfort reasons alone, Haven't heard any internal combustion headphones. Yeah. Any pad recommendations for the Aeolus? I don't have an Aeolus handy. Unfortunately, I keep saying I need to get in contact with Zach again. It's just, and I need to, but it's just so much stuff keeps piling up. I gotta reach out to the folks from the Civga folks as well, because I think they wanted to send something over for review, which I'd love to check that out. What is a good DAC amp setup to run LCD4 Utopia Susvara optimally? Thank you, by the way, JT. Yeah, so Susvara, if you want an endgame amp, the Bakun was a crazy experience. And then for a DAC there, yeah, I like the Matrix X Saber Pro. But I also think you could, there's probably a good argument for some of the chord stuff. I haven't spent that much time with that stuff, though. But yeah, Bakun was nuts for the Susvara. The LCD4, I don't know. Again, there's probably a lot of question marks about that. I imagine that what works well for the Susvara probably works well for the LCD4 because they do both benefit from high current. But I'm not going to say you need a speaker amp to drive that stuff. You could probably get away with something that is reasonably high end that has lots of power and lots of good. Running it balanced with high current is a good idea. By the way, this Bakun is not. It's just regular single-ended output. And for the Utopia, I really like the Utopia off of the low impedance, like the 8 ohm out of the amps and sound amps, for the tube amps. Kind of humanizes it a little bit. Off of the Forge with the 8 ohm out, it was pretty crazy. But very much more affected than I think on the Kenzie. The Kenzie was more about that sort of sweetness, and I don't know well to use these subjective terms, but that sort of euphony, as people call it. I didn't like it off of the Euphoria, actually. I thought it boosted the bass way too much. Like the Euphoria's output impedance, I think, is a bit too high for the Utopia. Whereas it doesn't change at all on the low impedance, like the 8 ohm out of the Forge and the Kenzie. But if you use the 32 ohm, then it's going to change it, yeah. How does the treble response of the new LCD-X Open compare to the clear MG/OG? Well, I mentioned earlier, but it's closer to the clear MG in that it's a little boosted. Like for the upper treble, it's a little boosted on both there. So it's a little more like shimmery. I think the clear OG is a little more normal there in the upper treble, but at the cost of having a little bit of unevenness there in the mid treble, making it a little bit more kind of gritty there. But some people don't mind that. Like I also don't really mind that. Like I can totally see why it's not as smooth as I think I would like. But yeah, it's I actually think in some respects the LCD X is a little smoother there than the OG clear. But again, I'd still EQ the LCD X. I'd probably EQ the clear MG, and I wouldn't EQ the clear OG, if that makes sense. Yogi, thank you. Foca clear OG or good condition HE6 must have no graininess, good dynamics, slam, texture, and separation. I listen to a lot of percussion and distorted guitar and some ambient stuff. Original HE6, good condition. Yeah, original HE6 is definitely the one that I would pick there. Hard to find that stuff though. Like if you have a line on one that's under like $1,200, buy it. It's the only question with that stuff is you don't know, because it's used, you don't know how long that stuff's gonna last, and you don't know what people have done with it if they brought it off of a speaker amp that they weren't supposed to, and then got it close to just like getting the driver to like rip itself. So yeah, I would say HE6. Start watching at 5:49 minutes. They show pre-burn in, then 1 hour, then 24 hours burn in. There's a noticeable change in the sound. It gets worse, softer, and smoother. So I don't know what you're talking about exactly, but you actually wouldn't be able to tell what the difference is if you went 24 hours without listening, because their auditory memory is nowhere near good enough for that, unless the change is like really dramatic, which I have a hard time thinking that it is. But if you had, the way you would do this test is you'd have a brand new one, headphone, whatever it was you were trying to test, a brand new one, and then you'd have one that would be burnt in 24 hours, then you'd have another one of the same model burnt in 100 hours. Even then it gets tricky because there is unit variation, so you'd have to control it a little, like you'd have to have measurements of each of them, and also use fresh pads on each of them too, because I would suspect even in those cases, over 24 hours, 100 hours, 150 hours, there could be some pad compression, pad wear, that could have an effect there. So it's a tough experiment to do, but I think that's the only way to do it, is to have all of them kind of in a row, because our auditory memory is not good enough to be able to, remember like a day ago what you heard, especially because like if you're listening to something at the end of the day, that's totally different from listening to something at the beginning of the day. It sounds like crazy, but like your brain will start to like normalize the sounds that it's heard over the course of the day, and so you're not going to be actually as like fresh and attentive at the end of the day as you are at the beginning of the day. The 5XX chassis models have always had better stage than the 6XX. You're talking Sennheiser, not Hi-Fi Man, right? They've always had better. Yeah, the HD6X whatever headphones don't have good soundstage. Like some people don't mind that though. Like they don't care about the 3 blob effect or the tightness of it. They actually like that, the more intimate presentation. And that's the crazy thing about that 6 series, is that they actually have really good separation, even though for their soundstage is not large. I mean, to a certain extent, like no headphone has actual soundstage. The closest one would be the HD100S, but even then, it's not like having, speakers out in front of you. The HD 560S soundstage is 100 times better than the 58X. 100 times? It's definitely better. Thoughts on the HD 800S? Yeah, it's got a really good soundstage. No, it's also pretty detailed, and I actually have a... Oh no, I haven't uploaded that yet. I did do a measurement of it. Let's see if I can find it here. I did a recent measurement of it, and I was like, oh, whoa, this is actually kind of surprisingly really good. I say surprisingly because previously my assessment of it was a little too bright and shrill for my liking. Let me see if I can... Yeah, I have it here. 1 second. All right. Let's see if I can... So that's not bad. It is a little more north. Don't worry about the dip. That's Concha. So it's a little north of neutral here. But I think that the main characteristic of the HD800S is that the ear gain region is shifted from this, like maybe from 1 to 3K to like 3 to 5K. Like it's just shifted a little bit upwards, that whole thing. And so I think that it's good in certain aspects. Like it does some favors for certain genres, jazz tracks and things like that, acoustic music, classical music, but it also kind of is a little shrill at times for more upbeat stuff like rock and metal and all that. But again, it is the soundstage king, like for width at least. That it does. If you're thinking about a headphone that does one thing exceptionally well, for soundstage, that's the thing that all other soundstage oriented headphones, space and openness oriented headphones, are kind of measured against. So those are my thoughts on it. Heard Kurawong say you can get a pseudo frequency graph for amps by measuring crosstalk. Any chance you might look into this or have already? Looks like an interesting topic. I have not heard about that at all, but I am one day hopefully gonna get an audio precision of some kind. I haven't figured out what that is yet, or I'd like to get something like that, like audio precision, to be able to measure amps and DACs. But here's the thing about amp and DAC measurements, and I mentioned this briefly earlier, but they are not predictive of sound quality preferences the way the frequency response is. And there are a lot of people in the objective community who think that the amp should do literally nothing, and the DAC and the amp should do literally nothing. That the headphones are the only thing that should be doing something, like as in having a little bit of character to it. And I think that is wrong. I think that's just you're missing out on a lot if you think that. Experientially, there are so many experiences that are going to be beyond reach because you're going to be a little bit, it's too myopic of a viewpoint for sources. Now when you look at something like the Bakun and the Susvara, the question is, does the Bakun measure better on existing indexes and metrics that people have put together? Does it measure better? I actually don't know, but I want to say probably not. But at the same time, it sounds better. It sounds better than stuff that does measure well, because we know stuff that measures well on various different indexes can sound like absolute garbage. I have something right here. Well, absolute garbage is wrong. It's not fair, but it doesn't sound anywhere near as engaging as other stuff that might not have as linear of a response. So I think there's a really interesting question and conversation about what contributes more to an enjoyable experience, linearity versus non-linearity, at least when it comes to DACs and amps and things like that. And I think there are absolutely non-linearities that contribute to pleasurable experiences. And I think we could even use them reliably. We could say, do you like this better or do you like that better, to a panel of people, and you would find that just as much stuff that had non-linearities in it for source equipment would be found to be a positive experience, if not more so than some of the stuff that's a little more sterile and a little more like dead sounding. And so, if we're trying to get stuff to sound lively, if we care about that, or detailed or engaging, I don't think we should care at all about how well things rank on synad past the threshold of human hearing. Like, obviously, if something measures really badly there and is like broken, that's a problem. But beyond that, I don't think that's an indicator for this is going to sound better than that. And I think it's demonstrably so. Like, it's very obviously that the case. And the fact that people will buy stuff based purely on imperceptible differences in measurements that they see on amps and DACs is kind of hilarious to me. When that stuff is not any better than anything else that also measures well. And even stuff like that costs a ton more. Like, I'm thinking of the A90 here to a certain extent. The A90 compared to the Rebel amp is a very telling example of something that measures really well and sounds particularly sterile and limp and dead and makes me want to put rocks into my pockets and walk into the ocean because there's no joy in life after listening to it, versus something that probably doesn't have the same, like, probably has some sort of nonlinearities going on that is way more enjoyable to listen to. So, if I didn't know anything about the way things measured, I would easily pick the Rebel amp. And so with that, like, armed with that knowledge, I think it tells us things about how seriously we take these amp and DAC source measurements. Even though, so I'm not saying that the data is bad or that we shouldn't be paying attention to the data, just that the data is not, we shouldn't use the data to predict sound quality the way that we use frequency response and adherence to a target and linearity in that sense, because it's not close to being, an apples to apples comparison. The fact that people enjoy tube amps to begin with should tell us all we need to know about the value of amp and DAC measurements. But with that said, I still want to do it because what I'm interested in here is, what is it about the nonlinearities that are actually enjoyable, and are we able to like reliably identify them and then correlate them with positive experiences? That's what I'm interested in. It gets so difficult because people will then also use there will be tons of confirmation bias that's based on price to make people think that they should have a better experience. So if they paid a ton of money for something, then they feel like it should be a better experience. And this is the confounding variable for being able to identify whether or not nonlinearities, again, what I'm calling here nonlinearities is a broad category, but whether or not some of this stuff that is maybe less desirable from a measurements perspective can still contribute to a positive experience. But if you take that variable out, if you take the price confirmation bias variable away from this, then I think we can actually analyze this stuff and try and figure out in the data what it is that we're actually paying attention to. Because even if you think about, like, with headphones, the question about what is detail, what is good transient response, who knows what this stuff actually means? There's just like terms that aren't, that they're anchored to subjective experiences, and those, like, in theory, there are acoustic properties that are leading to this perception, right? As long as there's like agreement. But there are acoustic properties, and when we're talking about something like detail, it's not because you just slide the detail scale slider up on the headphone. It's like there are acoustic properties that you are perceiving that it's drawing your attention to things more. And so for those reasons, we're thinking of it like, oh, my attention gets drawn to the details and the nuances in ways that this other thing doesn't do. So something like that is probably going on with amplifiers and sources as well, but those things are not, they're not the, like, perfectly linear measuring things, right? They're things that are oftentimes not gonna, they're things like tube amps. This is the reason why certain tube amps can actually sound more detailed than solid state stuff. In some cases, like, there's also other cases where it can sound dirty and not as good either, but they're definitely, like, I was listening to the amps in Sam Kenzie, and like, man, that thing is more detailed and more lively and more engaging, and it draws your attention to stuff in more interesting ways. Again, that's all subjective stuff, but I imagine that it's not going to score as well on whatever existing indexes we have for source gear measurements. But that's rant over. That's a subject for another time, and I'm going to actually be doing some videos on that because I have here the Shenzhen, or the you guys can't see this, is it? Let me just there. The EX5 from Topping and Shenzhen, which is, I think, a very good value unit. It's high value as far as like the amount of stuff that you get, but even just the amp output here, which measures well, doesn't even sound as good as the amp output on the THX AAA1, which is a standalone amplifier, and also not, like, I wouldn't say that's particularly lively or engaging either. But, you know, this Topping unit here is, the DAC I think is fantastic, but the, like, and just what they've done here for the price point I think is excellent. But just because this measures well doesn't mean that I would ever choose this over a, you know, I'm just trying to think of something else that would be more engaging. I would never choose this over a Rebel amp, which is probably measures worse, for example. Unless I was specifically looking for a DAC amp combo, because they're very different things. Ooh, it's getting hot in here. I'll go for another like 20 minutes or so. Let me back up here. What amp do I recommend for the Sundaras? It is a tough question because the Sundaras, so many amplifier manufacturers have told me that the Sundaras are more difficult to drive than people realize. So, I don't know. Something with high current, run it back if you really want to get a lot out of it. Something like something balanced with high current. Yeah, probably that shit Jotunheim would be okay. Somebody mentioned that before. The shit audio Magnus, I'm sure, is totally fine and run that balanced. But I run this as far Sundara off of all kinds of stuff like Rebel amp, the even this THX AAA1, IHA6. So there's lots of stuff that you can run it off of, but I think don't pay as close attention to the specs there because of, well, at least this is what's been indicated to me by amplifier manufacturers. Because I also think they're paying attention to things that, like, you know, if you're going to design an amplifier, you want to look at, like, okay, what are the most popular headphones out there that I'm going to be designing this for, and then make your decision there and how you're going to implement it. And the Sundara happens to be a little bit, well, so there's a lot of headphones like the Sundara, HD650, you know, to a certain degree HE100S. The more sort of ubiquitous headphones that are out there, it makes sense to kind of like make your amp be really good for that. So, let's see. Yeah, the LCD2. Are you talking closed or classic? Because the closed back LCDs are huge. Mine's over there. Let's just grab this here. Oops, cable. There we go. Yeah, this is the LCD XC, but it's quite large. Let's see. Mixing engineers use nonlinearities in outboard gear to make things sound good all the time. That's interesting. I think what you're talking about, like some of the Rupert Neve stuff with the transformer couple designs, where they actually do boost the bass. Because yeah, I think that's probably true. I gotta catch up here, guys. Sorry. If I missed your question, feel free to ask it again. You guys are talking about the MX4. I still haven't heard the MX4. What blows my mind regarding headphones is that first impressions don't always stick for me. I hated the Allegias at first, but now I freaking love them. Yeah, I really do think that the first impressions question is a very relevant one because if if anybody spent some time reading the Harman research, the Audio Engineering Society, the papers, which I highly encourage everybody to do because they're very informative, and like I kind of approached it when I was reading it as like this is the way I sort of approach a lot of stuff, but like I approach things from a perspective of like, okay, where are the potential knockdown arguments, against this stuff? Where's the devil's advocate kind of like, where can I pick this apart? And I don't want to say I set out to do that with the Harman stuff, but like that was definitely in the back of my mind where I was thinking to myself like, if I apply a certain amount of scrutiny to this, where can I poke holes? And I found myself being just overwhelmingly convinced by the research. Now I did a video on this. I did find some holes. Like I think the big one is that it wasn't a particularly like large study, and that meant that we didn't have as comprehensive of a conclusion or I think we should have had multiple targets that resulted from it. That's the main point of criticism that I think we should have. Like basically the Malcolm Gladwell's spaghetti sauce examples, and like it wasn't just his, but basically what should have been done is you have more data and then you do a cluster analysis and you see what emerges from the data, and then you end up with several different targets there. I think theoretically there is segmentation in the data, and you could like take that, say, okay, people who are in this demographic would prefer this target and people who are in this demographic would prefer this. But nobody ever uses that. So I think we should just be using more versions of that. And that's why on my target, I use the 2013 base, because I think it's more appropriate for the segment of people that I'm talking to. Right? I have an upcoming video on noise canceling headphones where I just think if you're going to do something that's meant for the mass consumer market, of course you should tune it to the Harman target. But I don't think that people like you guys, I don't think that the 2018 base is necessarily appropriate. I think it's maybe a little bit much there. But I encourage people to read that stuff. Getting back on track to what we were just talking about. When reading the Harman research, why was I talking about that? The AES stuff. So the biggest, the other hole that I was trying to poke into it was that, at least in one of the main 2013 studies, it was generally like just first impressions, like that people like not everybody had the sufficient amount of time with the headphone that had whatever tuning it was that they were testing at the time, to be able to, I think, make like you end up with a little bit of that how like if you have like, there was some test I think that was done by Pepsi where the initial flavor was like much more preferred, but then over time it wasn't something that people actually wanted to drink. I think there might be an element of that with when we're dealing with sort of first impressions. So I think the way to look at the Harman research as well is to kind of have that in there, like as kind of like a caveat in the back of your mind, that a lot of this is based on 15 minutes of listening, 15-minute segments. And if you think that that's sufficient for getting an assessment of, whether or not you like something, then that's fine. But for me, I think, that's, at least for me, that's not enough time to figure that out. So I think, if you did want to poke holes in it, that would potentially be a place to look. But again, there's so many different studies like that have been done that are part of this, that over time you kind of end up seeing, kind of how that portfolio all comes together. Like, and I talked about this before, but like a lot of it wasn't done to determine what people like. A lot of it was done to determine what people like, but then so much of the subsequent research was like proving that the thing that they ended up with was the right, result. So yeah, I think they did a really good job there. But it's a worthwhile question about, what's like first impressions versus long sessions. It should be like a rhyme. What's not worth buying? MX4? Oh, okay. MX4 is an X driver with LCD4 magnets, apparently. It was just disappointing. Sounded like improved dynamics of the LCD X, but worse resolution. But yeah, I wonder about that as well. Just from a like, I'm doing this testing with soon, like next week, even with different testing different parameters like magnet strength. Like, what's the significance of magnet strength to begin with, right? Like, if all things are equal, does changing to stronger magnets have a meaningful impact? Um, yeah, it's an interesting question. Diaphragm, tensioning versus versus moving mass, and I guess diaphragm thickness, because those are two different parameters that could theoretically yield the same result. They could accomplish the same thing. And then the question is, well, what about what happens to all these like subjective aspects that we're talking about? Most high value K371, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'll see about getting some of the new Odysseys in with the new pads, like the LCD4 with the new pads, and the if they change the pads for all of them, right? Like, that's what I want to, well, confirm, I guess, and see how that changed. You guys are talking about the SA6 now. Yeah, yeah, first impressions. Okay, let's see. Kurwong mentioned and showed capacitor bank plug for the THX789. Anyone here in chat know what it's called? I'm not sure about that. Asgard for Centaurus? Maybe. I haven't tried that one. With some of that, a lot of that stuff, I think would be fine. As long as it's got enough power and current, I think you'll be fine. I have the Tour, could go Abyss Diana V2, slightly warmer, more forgiving with more forward vocals than the Phi. Be considered a good upgrade for someone who wants a planar with more detail. Yeah, I mean, it would have more detail, but I think the Phi is like, it wasn't close between the V2 and the Phi. For me, when I was evaluating both of them at CanJam, I was like, the Phi is like legitimately detailed, and then the V2 was like similar kind of tuning, but not as detailed. I think also, like, because I EQ'd the Phi, like the 10K on the Phi just was like way too much, so I dropped that down. So maybe. I mean, I certainly think it would be more detailed, but I also don't know if that would be what I would do. Like, I would, out of the two, like, if you're choosing between the V2 and the Phi, I think the Phi is the clear winner there for form factor to performance. I'm not gonna say price to performance, but form factor. And then you got to get the DMS pads, because they, or like the pad one, if he's still doing it, I don't know, because that actually made them comfortable. Yeah, I haven't tried the Jotunheim 2 amp. I was very close to getting the original Jotunheim like years ago, and when people were making these big statements about the declarative statements about the how significant these amplifiers change various different things. And my experience is that the amplifiers do change things, but as long as things are being driven sufficiently, there's not that big of a difference until you get to the high end, and then that's when these nonlinearities start showing up, or like the thing where they're deliberately trying to conserve second and third harmonic and stuff like that, to try and give a certain kind of character to the sound. And that's when that like, basically, I'm gonna call it here a bit of a misguided philosophy towards good experiences with sound kicks into gear, where it's people are going to say, oh, why would you get this thing? It doesn't measure as well. But it's like, well, it's not supposed to. We're actually deliberately trying to get some non-linearities and some character in there. But again, what's more interesting to me about that whole question is, are we able to identify what those qualities are that do lead to these preferable experiences? And I'd want to do like a panel with like a lot of people, and like get a lot of people to do like blind testing and just identify which things they preferred, and then kind of narrow down the scope to those amplifiers that have whatever qualities, and then say, okay, these are the qualities that were preferable over the more linear kind of sterile sounding stuff. Grady, thank you. Thoughts on the Abyss driver debacle? I'm not sure what driver debacle. You mean like the photos that got posted on Reddit where someone was like, it showed like that like it was very poorly tensioned. I actually, so I'm not, I don't want to make this seem like I'm going to go to bat for Abyss or anything like that, because I think there's stuff, like I think they can definitely do a lot to kind of work on their stuff as well. Like everybody can always improve on it. So I don't want to make this seem like I'm just like, planting a flag or anything like that. But on that question, like the Reddit post where people were like, going after the the $4,000 untensioned diaphragm, I really think that that's just like taking a look at one particular parameter that had been engineered for, and then that's like, again, like we're gonna do more videos on this subject next week and the week after. Like this month and next month we're gonna be doing more of these on testing these various different parameters as well. Like not with those headphones specifically, but something like diaphragm tensioning is a parameter that you can engineer your headphone for. And as far as I understand it, with planars, like if you're trying to get a low, like basically low resonance frequency where it goes up when there's a deliberate air gap, there would be a number of ways to do that. One of them would be to increase the diaphragm thickness so you get more mass, and that means that you're actually going to be like, it'll be thicker and heavier, I guess. The other way to do it potentially would be to make the tensioning lower. Now, again, that I don't know that for sure, but that's like we need to do the testing and figure out what's actually going on there. But in theory, that would be another way to do it. And so if they have, if they're and knowing the way that those headphones kind of work, like they don't couple to the head, and so they're actually tuned with a resonance frequency in mind. That could be one of the ways. That could be one of the ways that they're getting this bass response that it has. If you think about people's subjective reports about the bass response on those Abyss headphones, they often talk about how good the slam is. And I have to think, okay, maybe it doesn't look great, right? Like on a picture, because it looks a little loose there, the ripples, right? And maybe that's like even talking to, talking to Mad Economist about this stuff. That stuff looks probably like less than ideal, but it could be something where they were deliberately engineering for this looser tensioning for the sake of getting that subjective quality that people like. So I don't want to say that we should just like unilaterally, write that as a parameter off the board. Like I don't think we should just say, oh yeah, the tensioning was loose there, therefore that's bad, because they could have been doing that intentionally for something that people subjectively reported as good. So I think that's it's just there's too much stuff there's too many like question marks to make a judgment, and then there's also too many narratives the other way. So that's kind of my take on it right now. And again, hopefully I'll be able to get to the answer of this, but like eventually, like I do want to like state that that's not how I would do it. Right? It's not the kind of thing that I would probably want to focus on if I were to get into that kind of stuff. But I do want to find out if there are trade-offs, right? If there are negative trade-offs to doing that, and then at the very least we'd be able to say, oh yeah, this is like not good in these ways or because of these reasons. Or even if it's something like as simple as like this thing is more prone to rip itself because it's not tensioned as tightly, as an example, right? Which I don't know if that's true. Again, like I don't know. Well, I haven't tested the parameters yet, so we'll find out. We'll find out next week and the week after. Advice: never drink the ASR Kool-Aid. Yeah. Oh man, there's the recent thing on with the guy was saying that the pads didn't make any difference, or he was doubling down on that. I read that through that thread and was like, holy crap. How can anybody think this? Like anybody who's got any mind to research and evidence, it's like Jesus. It was hilarious. frequency response on the head and THD up to a point are the only things that matter in terms of perceivable sound. Oh, are you saying that? Like, what are my thoughts on that statement? I think it's entirely possible. I really do. Like, so this is the thing. Like, I started out like not having much knowledge, like years ago, right? Like, not having as much knowledge about this stuff, and then the more I researched and the more I investigated this stuff, and the more I was able to correlate different things, the more it sort of pushed me in that direction. So you either die as subjectivist or you live long enough to become an objectivist. No, but really, like, it's entirely possible that FR and THD are the only things that like, everything that we're perceiving subjectively in our experiences is potentially captured by those two metrics. Now, I also think, like, I hedge against this a little bit because I think it's also entirely possible that we're just not capturing something else. Or maybe it's possible that there is new information somewhere that isn't being analyzed at all. But yeah, I think, at least as far as the measurements that are the most important ones, it seems like FR and THD are the ones we should be looking at. Now, FR is predictive of preference and sound quality, but THD is not. And so that's why with THD it's basically meaningless, and it's why I don't like, it's meaningless past a certain point. Like, there's when something's broken and it shows really bad behavior there, then that's a problem and it means something. But below the audible threshold there, or maybe there's like some odd order harmonics that are contributing to something that people enjoy, this is that question about nonlinearities again that's worth asking, I think. Framus, thank you. If I just want a neutral headphone for audio engineering / mixing, what are your recommendations at various price points? K371. That is the headphone that I would buy to do, reference sound. If you think about it, if you want stuff to sound, if you're trying to buy something for a reference point for how stuff is going to sound on a most people's equipment, like the widest range of equipment, that's the headphone to get. If you want to get something where it's like specifically boosting certain ranges to look for like sibilant peaks and things like that to counteract them, then you would look at something else. But I think you can just do that with EQ, right? You can just do that with either a deck or software or whatever tools you might have at the ready. You can adjust that stuff, pretty easily, and then correct for it that way. Like, basically you're trying to compensate for that. Another one, like an open back, would be a Hi-Fi Man Sundara. I think that's pretty neutral. HD 600. I'm trying to think, but like, yeah, those would be kind of the ones that I would probably use. At least something kind of close to Harman above 1K would be what I would go after. And then for the bass, just keep in mind where the bass level is at. Like with the headphones frequency response, and then adjust accordingly. Like, for example, in the Sundara, without a bass boost, you're not going to get the Harman shelf, so you probably want to do that. Let's see. Oh yes, Metal says Sundara. Yeah, I would agree. Sundara, like, you do, like, I would boost the bass on the Sundara just to get it by 2-3 dB below 100 hertz, to get some kind of shelf there, and then maybe fill in the mids. But even on the newest, like the 2021, you don't really need to do much of that. Let's see. Can you briefly talk more about the topping EX5? The EX5, yeah. But what else I literally just got it in, so I haven't spent that much time with it. I need to play around with some of the filters and things like that. Comes with a nice little remote here. My initial take here is that it's extremely good value. Not that much exists that has this kind of DAC amp combo form factor with the features and functionality that it has. At the same time, this isn't what I would get personally. I would personally rather get something like a Sonko's LAQXD1 and then just get a separate amplifier, because I like to be able to kind of switch that stuff up. I mean, technically you can do that. With the you can just use the EX5 as just a DAC, and for that, it's excellent. This is a ES9038Q2M DAC, similar to what you get with the Sonkos LAQXT1, similar to what you get with the SMSL SU9. So you get that more detailed ESS based sound without. Seems like these ones are implemented well. Like they don't have that sort of cheese grater effect. But where I'm not super enthusiastic about the EX5 is the amplifier portion of it. But here's the thing: I've only tried the single-ended one yet. I haven't tried it with balanced yet, so I'm going to do that soon, or the XLR output yet. So I haven't tried that yet. I need to do a little bit more investigation, and then I also want to use the balanced outputs on the back because I believe it does have balanced outputs. So, again, I think this is highly versatile. This is basically very similar to an LAQXT1 for the DAC. It's I think it's $150 more expensive, or like $100 more expensive than the LAQXT1. Just they've given you now an amplifier portion and pardon me, and a display. So in my mind, I would just get the LAQXT1 and then get a separate amplifier because I'm not a fan so far, at least, of the amplifier here. It sounds quite sterile, I guess. Also Clear and O'Tour. Yeah, those are good. I loved the O'Tour, man. And the Clear, now at $990, the Clear is a ridiculous price. Very punchy boy on the Clear. I don't have a Clear here anymore. And O'Tour, nice wide sounds, big soundstage on the O'Tour. I liked it a lot. And I kick myself all the time for selling it because it was a great headphone. Amir with the pads. Yeah, Jesus. That was I kept to his credit, I don't think he ever it always just felt like him kind of like doubling down on things for the sake of doubling down, not because he actually believed that to be the case. I think if you had a conversation with him and showed the results, you'd be like, yeah, obviously pads make a difference. It just felt like like the consequence of being an internet authority on things, perceived internet authority on things. I mean, I'm sure I've said things that are wrong and people think I'm wrong about all kinds of stuff. So you just got to be open to taking that information and then making, adjusting accordingly. But that's also why I don't like to approach things from that standpoint of like I'm right and everybody else is wrong. Like there's definitely stuff where I do feel like that, but like for example, the DT1990 is one that's a hill that I will die on. But I'd rather approach it from a perspective of like, well, it doesn't seem to me to be the case that it's particularly good for a reference kind of sound because it has that massive harmonic imbalance. And I'm open to that perspective changing, I don't want to make it seem like this is like rule of law, authoritative, I think it's better when people kind of approach it and just give information and then see kind of where that leads. And that's what I think is a more scientific approach, to be honest. Figure out, where that information leads and then adjust accordingly if you need to adjust, right? If something's shown to be, false, figure out what's true rather than just trying to be authoritative for the sake of being authoritative. And I'm not like singling out, ASR for that. This is just like everywhere you go on the internet. It's like this, especially in like anything to do with, sound and headphones and audio, right? It's everywhere is like that. Spell check is killing you. No, but I mean, like to the credit of that, the data there, I think that data is definitely going to be useful for something. It's just not useful in the index that's currently set up at. So that's why I want to get a audio precision, and I want to try and figure this stuff out. But or talk to somebody who has one and send them stuff so I can do that, so I can find all that data as well, because I do find that data very interesting. In fact, all the stuff that like I'm learning about, like FFTs and RTA, like using the RTA tool in Rue is very interesting. Like using a the real-time analysis to get a picture of the frequency response with white noise, like that's pretty cool. So you can like kind of make sure you're positioning it right, so you actually get the representative frequency response, and for channel matching and all that stuff, it's cool. Alex, thanks. What's the best close/open back in the world today, pound for pound, in your opinion? I have $3,000 max for just one headphone. Don't need a power hungry one. Well, pound for pound, K371. So my pick for the best headphone in the world, of the ones that I've evaluated in my home environment, so not the ones that I've like, so for example, there's like the Sennheiser HE1, like the $50,000 thing, or 60,000, I don't know how much it is, right? There's that thing. Then there's the Hi-Fi Shangri-La, which I did hear at CanJam in a private room. I did hear that system. But for the attainable ones, the best headphone in the world, I think, is the Susvara, Hi-Fi Susvara, right now at least, right? That's obviously out of the price range. For closeback, what's the best closeback? Man, K371. No, I think there's an argument for the VC, the ZMF VC. But again, I haven't heard that in my home environment. I've only heard Tyler's when we had to meet up in Seattle, and I tried it there. Other than that, I think you'd be looking at, Stellia and Celesti. You'd be looking at the what else is close? Oh, the LCD XC and EQ'd LCD XC would be up there. I need to try the new Aurorus Audio Australis 2. I don't think Ruck's in the chat, but if he watches this later, send me one of those. I want to hear that. Because that's probably, those guys pay attention to tuning. But yeah, like the Celesti for like detail and dynamics, that's what it does well. It's frequency response, detail, and dynamics. Soundstage, no. Then another one, the Aeon 2 Noir with the perforated pads, does detail and soundstage and separation, like the planar separation advantage, also with a good tuning, frequency response. I probably wouldn't like the thing that it doesn't do so well at is dynamics. It's got that sort of compressed planar sound. So it just depends on what aspects you're looking for. Yeah, EQ'd LCD XC would be up there. Yeah. Michael, thank you. LCD X with EQ for jazz, acoustic, and classical, or would it be better to go with the LCD XC? I also listen to prog, metal, electronic, and want good bass. It doesn't matter if you like. I would say the X because it's open back, but in both cases you would probably want to EQ that, especially because you have such a wide, like you like what I like. Pardon me. So I think you couldn't really go wrong in either case. Make your decision on open versus closed based on, well, you can't just base it on this, but generally you want to make the decision based on use case. The reason why I say the LCD X would be my pick there, if you're picking between the two and it doesn't matter what you're like, if it's open versus closed, is the LCD X is lighter and more comfortable. So for that reason alone, I would probably go that route, and then I would EQ the bass up, like the sub bass, and then I would kind of fill in I did an EQ profile for that, I think, but I'd fill in the upper mids there around 4K a little bit. And actually, that's the thing, like with the LCD XC, the rest of that is totally fine. I think you'd want to smooth out some of that. Like I think there's like a 5K peak there somewhere on the XC, but the XC, the rest of like the tonal balance, I'd say is better. It's more neutral, and it just needs a little bit of a sub bass boost there. I say needs. None of them need it. It's just, preference. But that's what I would go LCD-X because it's lighter, more comfortable, and then a little bit of EQ. Sonko has released a dedicated headphone amp recently. Oh no, is the SGA one? Oh no, I'm thinking of the SDGA one. I know they did a full side, like a big boy DAC as well. And it didn't measure as well as the little one. But again, that's one of those things where it's like, do we care about that? Maybe not. Maybe we do though. For DACs, maybe we do. I don't know. But Sonko is the guy who does the Sonko stuff. I think his name is Ben on the forums. Could be wrong about that. Ben or I don't know. Don't remember if it's Ben or Roy or something like that. But anyways, he seems to really know what he's doing with the DAC stuff. A good tube amp for the Sennheiser 560S. I fundamentally don't like to recommend tube amps that are not the high-end tube amps. Like, if you're gonna go for a tube amp, make it a high-end one. Which I know it sounds dumb because it's like you like that stuff gets really expensive, but like there is so much value in the solid state end of things in the low end that it just seems like a much better choice. Whereas if you really want to get a crazy experience from a tube amp, like if you're looking for that experience, that doesn't really kick in until the high end stuff. I don't know, that's just been my experience with them. Like none of the low end tube amps that I've tried have been all that special. I think some of the tube hybrids would be more interesting there, but my pick would definitely be a solid state, like up until like $1,000 basically. Maybe there's some stuff in there, like some of the shit audio stuff that's like a hybrid, that again, stuff that I haven't heard, so I can't really comment, but like, you know, for the most part, all the ones that I have tried that have been kind of like low to mid range tube amps haven't been that impressive. Maybe if you get an OTL, like a bottlehead thing, something that's like very dedicated, but even still, I don't know if you'd want to do that for the 560S. Maybe, but that's like 150. It's 150 ohm headphone, right? 120. It's a lower impedance headphone than the 6 series, at least. I need to try the pleathers. Oh, the vegan leather. What did he call something like that? Yeah, Grover seemed to prefer them. If he still has them, maybe I'll get him to send them up. Any chance on a 1266 5TC review in the future? I'm trying to find one. I would love to review it. I keep I keep bugging DMS about it, but I don't know if it's worth it for them to send it to me because we're gonna measure it on the Gross, and we're gonna, basically it's not gonna be a curated review, so it'll be a honest and truthful review, right? So we're not Linus, and I actually think I would probably give it a positive review, because when I tried it at CanJam, I didn't find it as uncomfortable as a lot of people said it was. I was like, I could wear this. and also I found that the technical performance was insane, so like in a good way. So I think I would probably give it a positive. Like again, based on like the 10 minutes I spent with it at CanJam, just a little bit nuts there. So at the very least, I'm trying to get one in, but I can't tell you when. And the other thing is, like, I could get one in maybe from somebody who sends one, but that wouldn't necessarily be representative of a current revision one, because they're doing revisions for this stuff a lot. So I'd want to get one directly from them to say, here's what we're currently working on. This is the thing. And, here's like what we recommend you use as a source, that kind of stuff. Rather than somebody with a half working unit sends one in, and I try and run it off of something that is not meant for it, or I don't want to have to deal with that. Basically, as little goalpost shifting as possible is what I'm for that kind of stuff, because I've been thinking about that a lot. Like, on the one hand, like you shouldn't have to make those kinds of considerations, but on the other hand, stuff like the Sysvara, the Abyss, the LCD4, the people who are gonna be potentially getting that stuff aren't running it off of a THX 789 or a Magnius or something like that. Like you're gonna be trying to get like the end game that headphone is, supposed to be. So I imagine that folks are running that stuff off of like more intense gear. LCD-X versus Borealis and Technicalities. Ruck's gonna kill me if he sees this. So LCD-X is definitely more detailed than the Borealis. Borealis, I think, has a more even distribution of images for soundstage. Borealis also has better macro contrast, but the thing about the Borealis that I didn't like, which I probably should have mentioned more in the review, is I didn't like the 5K peak that it has. To a certain extent, I think it's maybe necessary to kind of balance out the like 1.5K forwardness, like the mid-range forwardness. But if I were to EQ the Borealis, yeah, I would drop the 5K. It's like 5.3K or something like that. I'm sensitive to that kind of region, so yeah, I mean, but I also EQ the LCD-X. So for Technicalities, it depends what you want. If you want the dynamic driver macro contrast, Borealis. If you want detail, separation, incisiveness, LCD-X. Imaging, Borealis probably. It's not like a huge stage or anything like that, but I think you get like the more even distribution. Let's see. And for timbre, I mean, I didn't think that it had the most natural timbre. Like, I still think those Sennheisers have a more natural timbre. But a lot of people are specifically after the Borealis for its timbre, so they hear it differently. Oh, okay. WA 33 fully loaded for HD 560S. Oh, Jesus. Ever since I EQ'd out the 5K peak on the 560S, it sounds a lot more detailed. Yeah, so that's sort of the unveiling of your. This is the reason why an even tonal balance without any harmonic boosts or stuff that overshadows other stuff is gonna sound better and more clear than if there are those sorts of like whenever there's a 5K peak, it sounds like everything's compressed to me, like especially like for percussive hits. So I call it percussion compression when there's that boost there, because it's that particular harmonic that has that effect. So on the 560S, it is actually a little bit forward there, like 4 to 5.5K, maybe even 6K, like that sort of lower treble is a little forward. And that did change depending on the pad compression. So for you, if you're hearing it a little bit more strongly, it might be because of the way that it couples for your head, that area is even boosted a little more. So that would make sense to EQ that down. Yeah. Kenny, thank you. Do you have tips to train your ear? I have 6XX Sandara K361, but hard to put into words differences. Okay. I did a video on this, and it's one of the ones where I went outside for a hike. But basically what you're going to do, because you have some headphones there that are like pretty close to like reference, like at least above 1K, like reference kind of sound. Like they elevate appropriately where the brain expects there to be an elevation. And so what you're going to do, like pick the Sandara or K361, probably more so than the 6XX. But then what you're going to do is you're going to download and install Equalizer APO, and then use the PCUI, and then just listen to music. Like, you set it all up so that you have it all working and stuff, but like listen to music and then boost or reduce various different ranges in the frequency response to get a sense of what those boosts or dips sound like. And then next time you're evaluating a headphone that's not one of those headphones, you'll be able to recognize those frequencies when there's a peak in one region or another. And it's something that like initially I wasn't that great at, but over time it became very easy to recognize harmonic imbalances, like to the point where even Corinne and I were talking about it not that long ago. But like you can immediately hear it when something is wrong now. Like for people like us who like do this kind of stuff a lot. I'm sure metal's the same way. Like you immediately hear when those imbalances are there because you're so used to what that, what the reference sound is, right? Um, and and yeah, like I'd say play around with EQ. That's the best way to learn how to, and just pick a frequency range. What does it sound like when something is boosted here? Okay, let's boost that region on this reference headphone. Then the next time you hear that sound, then you'll know what it is that's being boosted. Sergio, thank you. Really like the streams. Not sure if this was answered, but I'm looking for an Ananda upgrade with more bass and not as bright. They tried the LCD-X, but no go. Well, the LCD-X, you'd want to EQ it, yeah. I mean, my answer there is to just EQ it. Yeah, if you're looking for a planar, more bass, not as bright. See, the problem with planars, it's not a problem, but it's a common trait in planars. Unless there's a deliberate leak with the pads, you're not going to get a bass shelf for open backs that have this kind of design. And most of them aren't tuned like that. So, yeah. I would almost say if you can get that Adorama sale for that HE6 SEV2, get that. Because that, at the very least with that one, it's I'm not actually sure what the diaphragm is for that, but I know the original HE6 is PET. But what I suspect is that on the HE6 SEs, they're also using a higher mass diaphragm, and so they're not as bright in the treble, and they're a little more focused towards the sub bass, and they have a much lower resonance frequency. So even though the Ananda would technically have more, like, if it depends on whether or not you're getting a seal, even though the Ananda would potentially have like a higher level there for the bass, the overall like relative tonal balance would make it seem more bass focused on the HE6 SEV2. So if you can find that, don't buy it full price. That's crazy. Like $1,700 or $1,800 for that? No. But at whatever it was, like $800, that's definitely an upgrade, I think. Or if you can find an original HE500 or HE6, yeah, definitely do that. But what else? I mean, I still think, yeah, LCD-X with EQ, like you gotta boost the sub bass and drop 12K, and then it's a warmer headphone. If you want a much more expensive one that is kind of like that, the Rosen Audio Rad Zero, but we're talking like $2,600 for that kind of stuff. So if you are open to dynamic driver headphone, Focal Clear would be definitely more punchy. All right, guys, a couple more questions and then I'm going to call it because, yeah, it's been over 2 hours. Tour versus HE500/HE6, do they sound similar? Very different. Very, very, very different. Auteur is more about space and naturalness. Very good frequency response there. A little hint of warmth there on the Auteur. HE500 and HE6, depending on the pads that you use, they're a little more counterclockwise tilted. So while the treble is not that bright on those headphones, it's not like let me just try to phrase this correctly. The upper treble is not as boosted as something like on an LCD-X on those headphones. The overall tilt is a little bit more, upper mids and treble focused. However, the macro contrast and dynamics on the HE6 and HE500 is very special, and so yeah, and they're also more detailed. Like both of those are more detailed than the Auteur. More separated, I guess. So very like polar opposites. All three of those are good headphones, though. Don't use the Odyssey plugin for LCD-X unless they've updated it recently. the, I mean, they should, but the Reveal Plus on the LCD-X is not applicable, at least as far as like whenever they make a revision, it usually takes a little bit of time for that to catch up. So I'm actually not sure if they did an update recently. Don't then don't listen to me here because I haven't checked that in the last little bit. But at the time they released them, I didn't see an update for it, so I would do it manually. Do the Sundara sound compressed? Less so than the Ananda and the Aria, weirdly enough. Uh, so I think it has to do with the like those ones. They have very large like cups that kind of go past your jaw. So I don't think you're getting. Maybe that has something to do with like pads and things like that, or the way that it sort of conforms to the side of the head and getting the coupling. But yeah, the Sundara it does have better macro contrast than. Still, it's not great, not like a dynamic driver, but it's one of the better ones for mid-range planars. Yeah. Metal 571 sitting here just listening to EQ'd white noise. uh, White noise is very interesting in the like when you're doing measurements. You get a lot of interesting results. Hmm. Which type? Okay. Which type of headphones sound more natural, dynamic or planar? Um, the typical answer there is dynamic, but I think one of the reasons for that is because we're so used to hearing stuff on dynamic driver transducers. So because like speakers in general, like you walk around and listen to speakers, those are generally going to be moving coil transducers, and so we're pretty used to hearing stuff like that. I think there's also something to be said for uh, like sound waves being produced by that stuff and what's more similar to the way those sound waves are produced in real life. I think Tile did an article about that a long time ago. I don't know if that's correct, but there's something interesting there. But yeah, you can have good and bad timbre in both dynamic driver headphones and planar magnetic headphones, but typically you find good timbre in more natural timbre in dynamic driver headphones. Yeah. Olive is the benchmark for hard to please. Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more easy to please because like for me, I don't think that everything has to sound the same. Like I think I said this in the recent video where I went outside and covered some of the tribrids and stuff like that and this Kiwi Ears Orchestra. If anything, actually, like the Kiwi Ears Orchestra is the thing that kind of demonstrates it to me, like that not all headphones need to be tuned to the same target. You can have character and flavor in things that are, and the SA6 is another great example of this, right? The SA6 is not a neutral IEM, but it's so good. Like the frequency response there is so versatile and it's just, yeah, same with the U12T. And there are reasons to prefer that. Like those will sound better for certain recordings than the neutral one will, right? And the Kiwi's Orchestra is another one that's just so clever with its tuning, and so well done for, like, yeah, it's not neutral, but at the same time, it's every, like, all of my music sounds amazing with this. The kind of music that I like sounds amazing with this. So I think I'm a little bit easier to please than someone who might be just looking for an HD 600 sound, like that one thing, or like, well, I don't know, pick a headphone that you think is neutral, right? So yeah, best headphones under $400, most detailed Hi-Fi Man Sundara or Sennheiser HD 600 or Sennheiser HD 6XX with an amplifier for all of those. That's yeah. Was the crazy thing that I don't get with a lot of this stuff is like there are people who do not hear the differences in technical performance at all. Like people who are very smart people who are very good at, they understand the way the measurements work, they follow the stuff, but they just don't hear the differences in something like micro detail and microdynamics, or the blunting of transients on something like a Panda, or the something like soundstage, something like macro contrast. Like I don't understand how people don't hear that stuff. It's kind of crazy to me, but it's people who just don't, they're not bothered by it or interested in it. Like I think maybe that's like if those people listen to a Susvara, then maybe that they change their mind, like the extreme examples. But I think even still, like there's a pretty big difference between an HD 600 and 6XX and a 560S. I think there's a noticeable difference there in terms of detail that it's not insignificant. And I think that people who are evaluating this stuff, I can't understand how people don't hear those differences or don't care about those differences. To me, that's so interesting. If the Susvara is 100 for technicalities, what would the Sundara and the 560S be? Out of 100? I don't think it works that way, because the Susvara is amazing at detail, at soundstage, well, it's not the most spacious, but it's pretty good. At tonal balance, and it's not bad for macro contrast either. It's just not as good as an HE6. Okay. So it's not like it's 100 on every single metric, I think you have to kind of break it down a little bit, because also it depends on what you care about. There's some people who only care about macro contrast. There's some people who only care about detail. There's some people who only care about soundstage. So it's not as simple as just saying a single index or scale, because people have different quantities of earwax. But yeah, so to get to that question, if this as far as 100 for technicalities, what would the Sundara and 560S be? Depending on if you're talking like strictly like detail and like clarity for trailing ends of tones and microdynamics, Sundara would be like 60. I don't know, 70, and 560S would be like 10 points below that. I don't know, like everybody's going to be valuing this stuff differently as well, and that's why I don't think you can kind of distill that down to a single number, because that number it only hinges on how much people care. If you care a lot, then the Susvara is 100, and then those other ones are like 20 and 10. But if you don't care that much, then maybe the other ones are like 90 or 95, So it all depends on how much you care. I have an upcoming video where I talk a little bit about like how people don't always like care about those qualities, the other qualities beyond just tonal balance. And my answer there is that you just have to be more discerning with this stuff. You just have to listen harder, because I think like it is so obviously there when all things are equal and things are EQ to the same target. There's absolutely a difference. But okay, guys, that's going to do it for this live stream. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. It's good to see everybody in the chat. Thanks for hanging out the whole time, for those of you guys who stuck it out to the end. I will see you guys in the next one. And for anybody who isn't aware, we're doing a giveaway on this channel for the Sennheiser HD800S this month. And that is just on headphones.com/pages/giveaways. So if you want to sign up there. We'll, at the end of the month, July 31st, I think, I'll do another live stream and we'll announce the winner. But we'll talk to you guys. I'll probably see you guys next week on the live stream, but we'll have some videos out on the channel in the meantime as well. Bye for now.